The most dangerous prison isn't made of walls. It's built from other people's opinions. Carl Jung warned that when we surrender to the collective mind, we don't just lose our individuality, we lose our soul. And yet, every day, people trade their deepest truths for the comfort of belonging. What if I told you that following the crowd is the fastest way to destroy yourself? The crowd has always had a dangerous power, not because it is made up of evil people, but because when individuals merge into a collective, they surrender something sacred: their ability to think, to doubt, to stand alone against the tide. In the ancient world, this was already clear. The trial of Socrates stands as one of the earliest warnings of what happens when a single mind dares to challenge the comfort of the majority. Socrates questioned everything, not to mock, but to awaken. He asked his fellow citizens to examine their beliefs, to strip away illusions, to live consciously rather than blindly obeying tradition. Yet instead of gratitude, the crowd turned on him. They accused him of corrupting the youth, of disrespecting the gods, of being a danger to the city. The truth was simpler. His presence made them uncomfortable because he revealed the cracks in their thinking. Faced with the choice of admitting their own ignorance or silencing the man who exposed it, the majority chose silence through condemnation. They voted for his execution, and history remembers not their faces, but the calm philosopher who drank the cup of poison rather than betray his truth. This pattern did not end with Socrates. Again and again, visionaries who carried uncomfortable truths were sacrificed to preserve the illusions of the many. The crucifixion of Christ, though often told through the lens of faith, also reveals the psychology of crowds. Here was a man who spoke of compassion, of justice, of a kingdom not built by earthly rulers. Yet the very people who once welcomed him with cheers turned against him when pressured by leaders who feared losing control. The masses demanded his death, not because his message was hateful, but because it threatened the fragile order they depended on. In that moment, the crowd proved that the majority often chooses safety over truth, conformity over conscience. Even outside of religion and philosophy, history is filled with prophets and poets who were cast out, mocked, or silenced because their vision could not be contained within the boundaries of collective comfort. The message was always the same: do not disturb the dream of the many, even if it is an illusion. Carl Jung, centuries later, saw this repeating pattern and offered a chilling observation. The larger the crowd, the smaller the individual soul. What he meant was not that people in groups are evil, but that the individual's inner voice shrinks when drowned out by the roar of belonging. Conscience is fragile when faced with thousands of eyes demanding compliance. In every age, the crowd convinces itself that it is defending truth, but in reality, it is defending its own shadow, its unspoken fears, its need for security, its desperate wish not to be confronted with what it has buried. Consider the story of Socrates one more time. In the days before his death, he was offered a chance to escape. His friends begged him to flee into exile, to live quietly far from Athens. Yet Socrates refused. To run would be to admit guilt, to betray the very principles he had lived for. He chose instead to stand firm, knowing the outcome was sealed. The image of the philosopher calmly accepting his fate, while the crowd congratulated itself on preserving order, is one of the clearest symbols of this ancient warning. The crowd punishes truth-tellers because the truth threatens its illusions, and illusions are the fragile walls that hold society together. Groupthink is not a modern invention. It is an ancient mechanism wired into our psychology, born from the survival needs of our ancestors. In early tribes, belonging meant protection, and rejection meant danger. To question the collective could mean isolation, and isolation often meant death. The brain still carries this survival code, but in the modern world, it distorts itself into something far more subtle and dangerous: the quiet surrender of individuality to the collective voice. Groupthink occurs when the desire for harmony or belonging is stronger than the desire for truth. People silence doubts, ignore evidence, and push away uncomfortable insights simply to remain inside the invisible walls of acceptance. Jung understood this danger deeply. He warned that the collective mind, once dominant, can devour the individual soul. In his words, the crowd is where people become shadows of themselves, acting not as conscious beings, but as fragments of a hive that cannot bear contradiction. The illusion of safety is what makes this mechanism so persuasive. When we align with the majority, we feel secure, validated, less alone. Yet that very feeling of safety is the trap. History shows that entire societies have marched in unison toward destruction while believing they were protected by the wisdom of the many. The witch trials, the economic frenzies, the political purges, each was fueled by people who convinced themselves they were simply following the consensus. But consensus is not truth. It is merely the loudest echo in the room. The frightening part is that groupthink does not announce itself. It feels natural. When you are surrounded by people nodding in agreement, when your doubts are met with silence or ridicule, your mind begins to twist. You question your own perception. You wonder if the discomfort you feel is foolish, if perhaps the majority truly sees something you do not. This is the psychological cost of conformity, the erosion of inner trust. Think back to a time when you stayed silent in a group, even though you disagreed. Perhaps it was at work, when a decision felt wrong, but everyone else seemed certain. Perhaps it was with family, when you knew the truth, but feared rejection. In those moments, you were not weak. You were human, caught in the tension between survival and integrity. Groupthink exploits that tension relentlessly. Jung called it the loss of the inner voice, the silencing of conscience beneath the pressure of belonging. The mechanism is subtle but devastating. First, you ignore your doubts. Then, you repeat the opinions of others. Finally, you forget that you ever doubted at all. What begins as silence ends as self-betrayal. The danger is not only personal. Once enough individuals surrender their inner voice, the group becomes a closed system, a circle that cannot be broken from within. At that point, reason is replaced by ritual, and the search for truth is replaced by the search for agreement. Jung believed that this is when the collective shadow takes control, turning the group into something less than human, a machine that feeds on obedience and punishes authenticity. This is why Jung insisted that awareness of groupthink is an act of survival. To recognize when the pull of the crowd begins to override your own perception is the first step toward freedom. The individual who resists may feel fear, but that fear is the sign of life, proof that the inner voice has not been extinguished. Groupthink offers the comfort of sameness, but at the price of conscience. The true danger is not that the majority will be wrong, but that you will forget how to stand apart from it. The madness of crowds reveals itself most clearly in moments of fear and frenzy. When reason dissolves and people surrender themselves to collective hysteria. One of the darkest examples is found in the witch hunts that swept through Europe and the early colonies. Entire villages convinced themselves that misfortune, disease, or even poor harvests were caused by unseen forces. The crowd did not ask for evidence. It demanded victims. The more people accused, the more the frenzy grew, until anyone who stood apart risked being branded guilty themselves. In these moments, the majority did not behave as individuals. They became something else, a single mind obsessed with purging what it could not understand. Jung would later describe this as projection on a massive scale, the unconscious fear of the community externalized and thrown onto innocent scapegoats. The crowd believed it was defending itself from evil, when in reality, it was attacking its own shadow. The same madness appears not only in religion, but in economics and politics. Consider the financial manias that rise and collapse with devastating speed. Crowds rush to buy into illusions of endless wealth, convinced that if everyone else is investing, it must be safe. Yet history shows these bubbles always burst, leaving ruin in their wake. Here again, groupthink masquerades as certainty. People see their neighbors prospering and ignore their doubts until it is too late. When the crash comes, those same neighbors join the stampede in the opposite direction, selling in panic and multiplying the devastation. The crowd does not learn because the crowd does not remember. It only reacts. Jung warned that such cycles reveal the danger of the collective unconscious left unchecked. Without individuals willing to hold their ground, the group becomes a storm, unpredictable, destructive, and blind. Imagine a villager during the height of the witch trials, someone who quietly doubted the accusations. Perhaps he knew the woman accused. Perhaps he had seen her kindness, her honesty, her humanity. Yet what could he do? To speak aloud would be to invite suspicion. To defend her would be to stand alone against neighbors, friends, even family members who had already surrendered to fear. So he stayed silent. He watched the trial unfold, knowing deep inside that injustice was being done, but paralyzed by the knowledge that the crowd could turn on him in an instant. This silence is the real tragedy of crowd psychology. Not just the destruction of victims, but the countless individuals who betray their conscience out of fear of isolation. Jung's words echo here. The larger the crowd, the smaller the individual soul. When thousands unite under hysteria, each individual shrinks until they are unrecognizable, their responsibility dissolved into the faceless majority. The madness of crowds is not ancient history. It lives on in every time people abandon critical thought for the comfort of belonging. Whether in marketplaces, political rallies, or online storms, the pattern is the same. Projection, hysteria, scapegoating, collapse. The crowd punishes anyone who dares to question the tide, because questioning reveals the truth the majority is desperate to avoid, that its certainty is built on illusion. And yet, within this darkness lies the lesson Jung wanted us to see. The crowd is always wrong, not simply because it chooses falsehood, but because it refuses to choose at all. It reacts, it echoes, it consumes, but it never reflects. Only the individual can confront truth directly. The moment you step back from the madness, you reclaim your soul. The moment you resist the frenzy, you awaken. In the modern world, the madness of crowds has not vanished. It has only evolved, given new weapons and new stages. Where once hysteria spread in the town square, now it travels at the speed of light across digital platforms. Social media has become the new arena of groupthink, where likes and shares serve as the echo of the crowd's approval, and silence or outrage become its punishment. The algorithms that run these platforms do not reward truth or depth. They reward conformity and intensity. Whatever excites the majority, whatever provokes the strongest reaction, rises to the surface. In this way, groupthink is no longer just a psychological habit. It has become a system engineered to amplify the roar of the crowd until it drowns out the quiet voice of the individual. Jung did not live to see the rise of digital networks, but his insights remain prophetic. He warned that technology could magnify the collective unconscious, giving its shadows unprecedented reach. Today, we witness this when misinformation spreads faster than correction, when outrage escalates before reason can breathe, when entire communities turn against a single person with no trial but the judgment of the mob. The pattern has not changed. It is still projection, still scapegoating, still the hunger of the collective to preserve its illusions at any cost. Consider the experience of someone who dares to post a controversial truth online. At first, perhaps only a few disagree, but disagreement quickly grows into accusation, accusation into condemnation. Within hours, thousands who do not know the person will join the attack, each adding their voice to the chorus of outrage. The individual is buried beneath the weight of collective judgment. The mob congratulates itself for defending virtue, but in truth, it has only silenced another mirror that reflected its own unacknowledged shadow. The cruelty of this new form of groupthink is its permanence. In the ancient world, the madness of crowds burned bright, but then faded. Today, digital records preserve every outburst, every accusation, every scar of collective hysteria. The punishment does not end when the frenzy ends. It lingers, archived, ready to be revived at any time. This permanence deepens the fear of standing apart. Many remain silent, not because they lack courage, but because they know the cost of speaking is no longer temporary exile, but lasting ruin. And yet, silence feeds the machine. Every unspoken doubt becomes another victory for the collective illusion. Jung would call this the victory of the persona, the mask society demands you wear. Behind the mask, your authentic voice whispers, but if you never use it, it weakens until you forget it was ever there. This is the ultimate danger of modern manipulation. Not just that the crowd punishes truth-tellers, but that it convinces countless others never to speak at all. And so the digital crowd becomes stronger with every silence. Each time someone swallows their doubt to avoid being targeted, the system grows more confident, more ruthless, more unquestioned. Jung would remind us that what is lost here is not just freedom of speech, but freedom of thought itself. To resist modern groupthink is not merely an act of defiance. It is an act of survival for the individual soul. You do not feel the loss all at once. It comes in small compromises. The meeting where you nod along though your gut tightens. The family dinner where you laugh at a story that quietly betrays your values. The post you do not write because the crowd has already decided what you are allowed to think. Over time, these small fractures become a fault line. Anxiety creeps in first. An edge in the voice, a tightness in the chest, followed by a dull shame you cannot name. Sleep becomes shallow. Victories feel hollow. You do what is expected and are praised for it. Yet the praise lands like dust. Consider the employee who notices irregular numbers in a report. At first, he tells himself it is harmless, that everyone signs off on these adjustments, that this is simply how things are done. His colleagues reassure him that he is overthinking. The team needs unity. The bonuses depend on it. So he stamps his approval, once, then again, until the stamp becomes routine and the discomfort fades. Months later, the truth surfaces, and the company collapses under the weight of its own pretending. The crowd that urged silence now demands explanations. He hears himself say, "I was just following orders," and the words taste like rust. This is the bill that conformity eventually presents. You may escape conflict in the short term, but you cannot escape responsibility in the end. Jung would say the mask has won. The persona, the socially approved image, has replaced the living person. And with that substitution comes a terrible emptiness, because a mask cannot love, create, or suffer meaningfully. It can only perform. When you live for the crowd, relationships follow the same script. You choose partners, friends, even careers that fit the role rather than the soul. You become agreeable instead of genuine, pleasant instead of present. People like you, but they do not know you because you are no longer showing up. The cost is not just internal. It radiates outward. Children learn to trade honesty for approval. Teams learn to punish questions. Communities become brittle, unable to adapt, because adaptation requires someone to say, "This is not working," and mean it. The deepest cost is spiritual. Every time you silence the inner voice, you train yourself to doubt it next time, until one day you realize you cannot hear it at all. That silence is not peace. It is abandonment. Yet the purpose of this warning is not despair. It is clarity. The pain you feel when you resist the crowd is a sign that your conscience is alive. The unease that rises when you are asked to betray your values is not weakness. It is guidance. The moment you acknowledge this, you begin to reclaim responsibility. The one thing the crowd cannot carry for you, and the one thing that makes a life your own. Breaking free from the herd does not begin with shouting your truth to the world. It begins in silence, in the moments when you sit alone and ask yourself whether the life you are living is truly your own. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires the courage to separate from the collective illusions that promise safety but demand your soul in return. To stand apart feels terrifying because we are wired to equate belonging with survival. Yet the paradox is this: until you can be alone, you cannot belong anywhere authentically. One strategy is deliberate solitude. Remove yourself from the noise, not as escape, but as medicine. In stillness, you notice how much of your thinking has been borrowed, how many of your desires were inherited from the crowd rather than discovered within. This is not about rejecting community, but about choosing it consciously. Another practice Jung emphasized was shadow work, the act of turning toward the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. The crowd thrives on masks. But when you confront your shadow, you dismantle the very tool Groupthink uses against you: shame. Every time you accept a hidden part of yourself, you become harder to control because guilt and fear no longer dictate your choices. The story of the whistleblower captures this moment of transformation. Imagine a worker who uncovers corruption inside a powerful system. At first, the pressure to stay quiet is overwhelming. Colleagues plead for silence. Supervisors warn of consequences. The crowd whispers that loyalty is safer than honesty. Yet within, a voice grows louder. The truth matters more than comfort. When that voice is finally obeyed, the worker steps into exile, but also into freedom. Though punished at first, history often vindicates such individuals, while the crowd is remembered only for its silence. Jung noted that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust conscience over conformity. To break free from the herd does not always require dramatic gestures. Sometimes it is as small as saying, "I disagree," in a meeting, or refusing to laugh at a cruel joke, or choosing not to repost what everyone else repeats mindlessly. Each act may seem minor, but each strengthens the inner voice, proving that it can be trusted. This builds resilience for larger acts of authenticity. Write in the comments, "My voice matters more than the crowd." This affirmation is not for applause. It is a declaration to yourself. The crowd's greatest weapon is the illusion that you are alone in your doubts. Yet thousands are silently waiting for permission to speak. The moment one person dares to act authentically, the illusion cracks, and others begin to remember their own forgotten strength. Breaking free, then, is less about defiance and more about alignment. Each time you honor your own perception, you reclaim a piece of the self that the crowd tried to erase. Over time, those pieces form a whole, a person no longer dependent on mass approval to feel real. This is the essence of individuation: to live as a conscious being rather than a reflection of the herd. The empowered individual is not louder than the crowd, but clearer. History remembers such people not because they shouted, but because they refused to surrender their conscience, even when silence would have been safer. Galileo looked through a telescope and saw a universe that contradicted the teachings of his time. The pressure to deny his discovery was immense. Leaders demanded obedience. The crowd clung to tradition. Yet his refusal to fully recant planted seeds that outlived the ridicule and fear of his age. Rosa Parks made a choice that seemed small in the moment. She would not give up her seat. But in that single act of stillness, she disrupted the illusion of the crowd that segregation was normal and eternal. Martin Luther King carried the weight of voices telling him to wait, to soften, to accept half measures. Still, he declared that justice delayed was justice denied, and his vision stirred millions. Jung believed that such individuals embody the process of individuation, the flowering of a soul that has chosen truth over comfort, responsibility over conformity. Their power does not come from dominance, but from authenticity. The empowered individual may walk alone for a time, but in doing so, they awaken others who recognize their own suppressed voice. This is the paradox of standing apart. It feels isolating, yet it is the only way genuine community can form. When one person dares to be real, they create a space where others can join them without masks. Empowerment is not perfection. It is the willingness to fail, to be misunderstood, to be disliked, yet to continue. The empowered individual knows that approval is fleeting, but integrity endures. Jung's promise is clear. Individuation is liberation. The crowd will always be wrong, not because every member is corrupt, but because the collective mind cannot tolerate the raw truth of the soul. Only the individual can carry that burden. Only the individual can turn it into light. To live this way is to accept risk, but it is also to claim freedom. The empowered individual becomes proof that one voice is enough to challenge the illusions of many, and that one conscience, fully awake, can redirect the path of history. The crowd will always cheer for comfort, even when that comfort is built on lies. The real question is not whether the masses will choose truth. They rarely do. The question is whether you will. When the noise grows loud and the pressure to conform feels unbearable, will you protect your soul, or will you trade it for belonging? That choice is yours, and it will define the life you live. If you want to see how this same danger hides in plain sight, in the mask of kindness itself, watch my next video. The danger of being too nice. How good intentions can destroy you.